Sir, we
Yes.
can start.
Okay. Good evening, students. We now come to the last lecture, this research and publication ethics. Last lecture by me. Of course, I have one more lecture, which is basically an assignment lecture. And so far, I have taken you across the whole gamut of research ethics, going through several stages, etc., and publication ethics, which I have described in my last few lectures. So today I'll be talking about a slightly different topic, which is predatory journals and open access publishing. Now, to understand what is this predatory journals and open access publishing, etc., we need to go back in time a little bit and see what is the genesis of these scientific journals, how they have come about, and how they have evolved across all these, I would say, centuries rather. So, if you go into this history of scientific publishing, if you look at the situation before, say, 1600s and early 1600s, the scientists, they were all working mostly alone, what are called lone wolves, and when they wanted to communicate with each other, they used to write scientific letters and pass them on to each other and communicate their results. That was probably the only mode of communication, scientific communication between scientists in those days. Because there was no such thing like research groups and things like that. Scientists were people who were alone, like Galileo, etc., have talked about it. They used to work on their own, out of their own interests, and quite a few of them came out with fantastic discoveries. So whenever it's a human nature that whenever you discover something new, etc., you would like to talk about it with your friends, etc., or your peers. So in those days, there was no such thing like scientific journals or anything like that. So people used to write letters to each other and inform them about their discoveries. A little later into the 1600s, there was some semblance of organized activity where the scientists, they thought that they should get together and form some associations or what are called societies. So this was the first instance of the Royal Society of London getting formed. And almost simultaneously, there was this French Academy of Scientists in France. And subsequently, of course, they used to have meetings of these societies where members of the societies, basically scientists, they had a platform to come together and have some discussions. Then after this happened, the French were the first to publish what is called a really formal scientific journal, which was called the Journal des Esquimaux. And this was the first page, the cover of that very first scientific journal in quotes, of course. This was sometime in uh, 1665 or something, and it was published in January. So this was the very first scientific journal which emanated from the French Academy of Sciences. Then very soon after that, the English did not want to be left far behind. So the first edition of the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, what is now known as the Philosophical Transactions, so that was published. So this was published in 1665, sometime I guess in the middle of the year, May, around May 1667. So this was the very first journal which came out from England, the journal in English, where it was called the Philosophical Transactions. Even to this day, this particular journal is a highly respected journal, Philosophical Transactions, and we still get to see a lot of good papers which are published in this journal. So this was published, and what was published in this journal? You can see some very typical problems of those days. So this was basically started by Henry Oldenburg, who was with the Royal Society. Because looking at the French, who had already they were the first of the blocks, he wanted not to be left far behind, and he convinced the Royal Society to fund the publication of this very first journal. So you can see that, like for example, the very first article in this, an account of the improvement of optic glasses by Campani. Then a spot in one of the belts of Jupiter by Robert Hooke. Who was Robert Hooke? Is a great Hooke of the Hooke's law, elasticity. And Robert Boyle is over here, an experimental history of cold. Okay. He has two papers, and the other paper appears rather out of place here, an account of a very odd monstrous cow. So this was the very first journal in English which was published from the Royal Society, and it was called the Philosophical Transactions. And mind you, after these journals started, of course, scientists slowly started sending their works, scientific works, to be published in these journals. But however, it is quite strange that the peer review process, which we are very familiar with, it did not really begin until the second half of the 20th century. So it was as late as sometime around 1970s, the peer review processes started with journals. So that was to give you some idea about how what went on this world of scientific publishing. And so this gives you a bit of the history. This was the first page or the very first volume of the journal Nature. Okay. So the weekly journal, it is still a weekly journal now. And now it happens to be one of the most highly sought after journals, with one of the highest impact factors. So this was the first page of that journal, Nature. Okay, so so people, once these things started, then the printing technology also started and improving and all those things. So once this got established, these print journals were the basic media through which scientists could actually publish their scientific research works. And then slowly down the line, what happened was these print journals happened to be quite expensive. And an individual scientist probably could not hope to buy, probably if he has enough money, one can do that. But in general, it was not possible for individual scientists to buy or subscribe to these journals because their subscription rates were extremely high. So here is where the institutional libraries, they stepped in and then started subscribing to these scientific journals. So in those days, I'm talking about when you talk about, say, 30, 40 years ago, well, when there was no internet or anything like that, the libraries were the only go-to places to look up scientific literature, what has been done in the past, what has been published in the past. So it was quite common to see scientists, students, everyone making at least one visit to the library every day to look up the latest in their own fields of research. So that was the next step where institutional libraries were used to subscribe to these scientific journals. And after that, of course, they were available to the scientific community, which was in the immediate vicinity of that library. And how could one publish in these journals? The researchers were required to submit manuscripts, which used to be typed or written up very neatly, and then sent to these journals by post for consideration. So imagine now if you are sitting in India and you wish to submit a paper to the journal in the United States. So you, first of all, you have to type it up very carefully, check whether there are no mistakes, etc. There were no computers also, of course, in those. So you have to type it up on manual typewriters and then check all everything is okay, proofread, then draw the figures, okay, by hand. We used to have different tools for making figures. So you used to make your own figures and then make some copies, some 2, 3 copies, because these manuscripts used to be sent to the peer reviewers. So one used to do all this and then dispatch them by post to these places. So typically from India to US in those days used to take at least 20 days to 25 days. And then after that, once the editors decide that the paper could be pushed ahead for further review process, then they used to be dispatched to the reviewers again by post. And so all this used to take a fairly long time of at least about 3 to 4 months before you could even know what is the fate of your journal. So after 3, 4 months, you used to get a letter from the editor mentioning either that the reviewers have rejected the manuscript or they have some comments on your manuscript, so you're expected to revise on those suggested lines and resubmit. Or for the lucky few, we used to get a letter saying that the manuscript has been accepted. Okay, so that used to be the norm till about, say, 40 years ago or something like that. Then a little later, the journals, they started charging the authors for accepting their, for publishing their accepted papers. So the authors were required to pay some publication charges for this, for that paper to appear in print early enough. Okay. Or if the author decided not to pay the publication charges, then the paper used to be put in a general queue awaiting a free slot uh, in the publishing uh, process. So that again used to take some time, probably another 2 months or 3 months before that paper could find a free slot. And then finally it used to get printed and published in the journal. And again, if you are again in India and the journal publisher is in the US, it used to take another 1 month for the journal to come by surface mail all the way across. And so you have to wait typically about a year or so before you could see the see your paper in print in the journal. So that used to be uh, the norm for what is called a subscription journal. So these journals were all called subscription journals because you subscribe to the journal. But then, if you look at the last 2 decades, this explosion of internet, etc., where which changed almost everything. Okay, not only just science, but it changed everything else. So once with the advent of internet, this publishing of scientific journals and papers, this went through a huge change because the internet offered several technical possibilities which are not possible earlier. The first thing was the speed with which one could communicate research results to the publishers or the editors. It was a matter of just had to load type your type your manuscript and then according to the format prescribed by the journal, and then send it over email to the editors. And once that is done, the editor also receives it immediately, and then he can take a decision. He or she can take a decision on whether it should be sent ahead for reviewing or not. And that process also was speeded up because they used to be done everything through email. So once this started, initially, of course, the very initial periods, they used to do all this by email, but then when it came to the final uh, proof of the manuscript which is to be published, one had to check everything by hand and then sign it and then send it by post. Okay. So finally, of course, that step also got junked, and everything is now entirely by email and internet. So this way, that was the first step where the subscription journals took the help of internet and again started, of course, still publish doing a print publishing. But then they realized once internet became fast enough that they could actually upload the whole journal on the internet. So these people started having their own websites wherein they started uploading their journals, whatever used to appear in print used to get uploaded. So that was the start of what is called electronic publishing. And now if you see that electronic publishing is the norm, okay? And you can also subscribe to an e-journal rather than a printed form of the journal, okay? So when you subscribe to an e-journal, that is of course still expensive, that would enable the scientists or students or scholars to easily download the published papers on their computers in their laboratories. Most of you probably do it in your labs wherever you are, but there was a huge process which went behind this. So they had all this history behind it. Now it's just a click of a button. You can sit anywhere and then start downloading your papers, provided, of course, your institution has a subscription to the e-journal. So that was the next step. And then what happened was once this e-journals or electronic journals became firmly established, the publishers, they found that the cost involved in maintaining e-journals was much less compared to having the same journals in print form. So once they realized that they had a huge benefit in cost, they started thinking about a new model of publishing scientific articles where anyone with some internet facility can actually download and read the papers, unlike those who had access to a subscription, electronic subscription. They had a new model wherein any Tom, Dick, and Harry sitting anywhere could just simply download from the internet a particular paper. So that means these papers or articles, they were open for everyone for download, and hence they were called open access articles. And the journals are and journals which offered this were called open access journals. Okay. So now, where do you get the funds for this? Because you see, ultimately, the publisher has to work with a business model. Okay, and unless he makes a profit out of this publishing, he is not going to survive. Okay, so he has to get resources from somewhere to sustain his publishing company or whatever. So the funds which were required for running these journals, they were actually recovered from the authors or the authors' institutions, so that the reader does not have to pay anything. So the first step for this subscription-based journal was to allow a certain number of papers in their journals to be made open access. That is, in a particular subscription-based journal, certain number of articles, they were made open access. How were they done? The, the author or the author's institution, they used to pay the e-journal for that particular article to be made open access. So now the beauty is that this open access article can be downloaded without any restriction by anybody who is having an internet connection. But if it is not open access, it is still a subscription based article, then a general public, a person from the general public will not be able to download unless he pays a charge to the publisher, and these charges can vary depending on the the category of the journal, and it's anywhere between 30 to 60 US dollars, which is still quite a big sum for, I would say, an India based scientist. Okay, so so you had this model where the subscription articles can be downloaded on payment of some money, or if it's an open access article, it could be downloaded for free by anyone. So this was what is called the hybrid mode of publishing. That means some articles in the journal are made open access on payment of some specific charges, and they had a term for these charges, and they were called the article publication or article processing charge, or APC. And the funds which are required for this article processing charge are recovered from the authors or their individual institutions, so that the reader would be able to download these articles for free. So what is this model actually? So you're, by making your article open access, you are basically purchasing an extra visibility for your article. Okay, that means anyone who's browsing through that particular journal, you will come across your article and see that it is open access and it can be downloaded without any restriction. So, so this model was adopted by most of the popular journals of the day, where you could pay these charges, article processing charges, and then make your paper, only that paper, okay, free for anyone to download. But then, if you look at the the ethics part of the whole thing here, there's a small twist here. Because in this hybrid mode, where partly it is subscription based and then partly it is open access based, if you take a particular institution which has actually subscribed for this electronic journal, okay, through which it gets all its articles, all the articles in that journal free. Now, if an author, if from that particular institution wants to make his article open access, then the institution has to pay again for that particular article. Okay. So that means you are paying twice for that same article, once through the subscription route and then again through the open access route. So this is like putting this is what is called double dipping. That is putting hands in both the pockets and then taking out the money. Okay, so that is a little unfair. So it was thought that the journals should offer a decrease in the subscription cost to the library of that institution if that institution is supporting a lot of open access articles from their scientists who are working in that institution. So that appeared to be a fair idea. Okay, but then in reality, this never actually happened. So all these big publishing houses, when you say big publishing houses, you can talk about, say, Springer or Elsevier or American Physical Society, and they are all very big publishing houses. Okay. So these people really have not reduced the subscription prices for their hybrid models. Okay. And they are also not very forthcoming about their subscription policies and how the money which is paid for the open access articles, how it is utilized and things like that. So looking at this situation, many of the European institutes and funding agencies, they have actually stopped believing in this hybrid model. So they have said that, look, there's no point paying twice to the same journal, okay, for the articles published by their scientists of that institution. So they have stopped funding this hybrid model, and they encourage only now they encourage open access. In fact, okay, and also you can find that this kind of charge, the article processing charge, is extremely high. It runs into about some $1,000 or something like that, $1,000 to $3,000, depending on again which is the journal you're talking about, and if it is a journal like Nature or something like that, they charge extremely high amounts. While the lower, slightly lesser impact journals, they charge lesser amounts, but still they are fairly high, order of $1,000 or something like that. And so it is found that this is discriminatory against third world countries, especially. And many, many of our people cannot afford to, not just in India, but in many other countries of the third world, scientists simply, or even their institutions, cannot afford to pay this what are called publication or article processing charges. Then the publishing houses, they started a new way of trying to attract people by saying that, look, if your article or paper happens to be uh, a very high quality and likely to uh, have a lot of impact, then probably we'll try to waive the publishing charges for that particular case. But then, these kind of waivers are extremely few and far in between. And it's not really worth, unless your institute, of course, has a lot of money and is willing to pay for your publication charges, it is a very, very difficult uh, proposition. Another thing which has been noticed is that these article processing charges, they are actually not sensitive to the market. but actually they are connected to the perceived value of the publication. And what do you mean by this perceived value of the publication? In case, say, you get to publish in, say, a journal like Nature, then obviously, since you are published in a high impact journal, it is quite likely that your paper also will have a very high value in the form of citations. Okay. There are likely to be a lot of citations for your paper. So that means the value of the paper will depend on how many people have cited your work and followed up on your work. Okay. So this is what is called a perceived value. Okay. It's highly relative. It's like a painting. Okay. How do you fix the value of a painting? Okay. If you say some painting of Renoir or Seine or someone who are big painters, so how do you tag the value for that painting? It's all relative. It all depends on how the people of that time would react to that painting and how they would uh, uh, evaluate that painting. So it's a perceived value. Okay. So that is what is meant by a perceived value of the publication. So these APCs are connected to the perceived value of the publication. Okay. So this is another problem. And then in a hybrid mode, in case you have enough money and you pay for the open access article, it's lying somewhere in between several other uh, papers which are subscription based papers. Okay. So one doesn't know a priori where that open access paper is lying there, because the whole journal is not open access. Okay. So there is what is called lack of discoverability. So this lack of discoverability makes this open access in a hybrid journal not really worth it. Okay. And now it has been found that more money really goes into this hybrid mode, which could be otherwise spent on, say, more innovative and more sustainable publishing models, which are now coming out. So this, keeping all these things in mind, one or two societies, they thought hard and then decided that one should have a fully open access journal. There's no question of any subscription for this. So articles which are published in these open access, fully open access journals, they're all free to be downloaded by anyone. So how did this come about? This started sometime in the early 2000s. And initially it was started by the Public Library of Science, which is called the PLOS in the United States, and the British Medical Journal in England. And they started this concept of open access and started charging, of course, fees for publication charges for the papers. And as I said, that these paper publication charges are extremely high, out of at least 3,000 or even above US dollars per publication. So this was found to be a very good business model for uh, basically for the Western countries. Okay. And now many of the funding agencies also have agreed to this and then insisted that when a research is funded, that particular result or paper has to be published in an open access journal. So because of this, many of these large subscription-based journals have actually they started opening up uh, fully open access journals, which are basically funded by the article processing charges. And as you see, as you have seen that paying 3,000 US dollars for a particular author or a scientist in India, for example, is a very big potential barrier. It's very rare that a scientist in India could get, say, a $3,000 funding from his institution or his funding agency to fund the publication of his paper in an open access journal. So this is again a little skewed against the third world. But the problem is most of the scientific publishing is done in the West. Their authors are mostly from the West or countries with enough resources. Then there's another issue where in the earlier case of subscription journals, whenever you send a paper and gets accepted, you have to transfer the copyright of that paper to the journal. Okay. And so once if you transfer the copyright to that journal, you will not be able to, no one else will be able to use anything from that paper, the figures or etc., without reuse those figures without a permission from the journal. So the journal has to give a permission for you as an author itself to use that previously published figures or whatever in a subsequent paper. Okay. But whereas in the case of open access journals, this copyright is something like a Creative Commons copyright, and that copyright rests with the author because he has paid for it. So, as I said, if anyone wishes to use any part of a published paper in a subscription journal, they will have to first obtain permissions, whereas for the open access journals, they don't have to take any permissions. So the users can share or use and build upon the original work without any restrictions. And it is also found that many of these open access journals, they have fairly good impact factors, and it is really worth publishing in those journals, except for this fact of article processing charges. And also, these open access journals, which are established by the well-known societies, which I told you that like PLOS or BMJ, they follow the same standards of scientific peer review, production and publishing, and all the ethics which I talked about, the publication ethics, etc. They're all intact for these open access journals, which are established by these well-known societies. But then even in these cases nowadays, due to the sheer pressure of making money and profit, there is some reason to believe that these standards can also go for a toss in case the situation demands it. So, so that was the situation now. And now to counter those open access journals which do not follow these publication ethics and standards of scientific peer review, etc. These people, they formed a association, and this was called the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, or OASPA. And they were all reputed publishing houses, like again Elsevier and Institute of Publishing, UK, things like that. So they tried to establish quality standards for this open access journals. So now in this regard, I would like to pose a question to all of you. Going by the rate at which the journals are converting into open access mode, okay, if so happens sometime in the future that the subscription-based journals do not exist anymore, but most of these journals are based in the West, the Western countries. You take any of these very high impact journals, you name it, it is there on the West only. So if these people happen to convert all their subscription-based journals into open access journals, then what will happen to the condition of our own Indian scholars as well as scientists. Okay, is there any possibility for our people to publish? Because you don't have the funds to pay these journals. Maybe one or two guys will be able to pay for lucky or whatever and powerful enough, they will be able to pay for their papers. But other than that, if you look at the rest of the uh, scientists and scholars, how will they face the situation in case this is hypothetical? Right now, it's a hypothetical situation, but then it's quite possible that the way journals are converting themselves into open access, that it can become the norm in the future sometime. So whenever it happens, what can we as Indians do? So just think about it. Let's see. We'll come back to this later. Okay, so that was something about open access publishing and subscription journals and some history which I gave you about how these subscription journals came about and all those things. So now I would like to talk to you about another very important topic which is called predatory journals and predatory publishers. In the recent times, this has really become the bane of our scientific community. So, what are these predatory journals and predatory publishers? See, this was an email which I received some time ago. It's all in Chinese. You can see it's all in Chinese. I don't know Chinese. I can't read this Chinese, whatever has been sent to me. So I just I was curious to know what it is. And then I ran it through our very simple Google Translate and I got the Google translation here. And what does it say? Conferences, publications, monographs can be arranged. Science Citation Index journals, latest call for papers. Call for papers, computer, artificial intelligence, big data, other directions can be combined. And then conferences, calling for papers. Some conference on multimodal information analysis. I don't know why it has been sent to me of all the people. Okay. Artificial intelligence, conference on network intelligence. Okay. And waiting time, okay, is about 3 to 4 months after publication. I don't know what the translation says exactly. And look at this punchline. There are less than 20 places left. Okay. Deadline end of the month. First come, first serve. So what does this mean? It means that these guys are enticing you to come and join these conferences, etc. And there are very few places left. Everything is almost full. So you please uh, pay and join. So to do this, you have to pay a certain amount of money for this person. There's some person given here, contact Mr. Jin on phone. Okay. You have to pay a certain amount of money, after which they say that you will be a part of this conference. They can even make you the uh, advisory committee chairman also. Okay. Or they can give you a plenary talk also. Or anything is possible. So this is the translation of this uh, email which I got. So this is one such attempt to entice people. And there was another email which said that, dear professor, I wonder if you have uploaded your proposal for a special issue of what journal it doesn't say. Okay, via this link or via this link. You can upload now your own special issue. Okay, and what are the benefits? You get an honorarium policy. Successful special issue organizers will be included in the steering committee of two important conferences. You never know what those conferences are. And then they will receive a certificate or organization of the special issue by the editor-in-chief. So you are writing the paper and you are also calling it a special issue. So their session and names will appear on the web after the end of the publication of the papers. You can enhance your CV as a guest editor in a special issue. And some name at the end of it many times. So this is another way of trying to tempt people to send their papers, etc. So these are the public way of trying to attract people. And who are the people behind these emails? So that's the shadiest part. So these predatory publishers and journals, okay, they are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication practices, a lack of transparency, and or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices, which I showed you just now. Okay. So these are really very hardened, criminal-minded people, okay, who are just looking for money and nothing else. Okay. So the main motive for doing all this is profit, and they're driven purely by the motive of financial gain. And in this process, the scientific scholarship just goes for a toss. These people have no morals, no ethics, no scruples, and they attract gullible people, not only scholars but also faculty members, through these kind of very aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation. Like you get these emails almost every day in your mailbox. Okay. So how do they make money? They charge fees for publication and without undergoing any ethical publishing practices like peer review, editing, okay, and in this process perpetuating bad research in general. So what happens here? See, they can do anything for you, provided you pay what they want. And gullible people, especially, suppose you are, say, even a faculty member, and you have some examination or a promotion interview which is coming up very soon. And nowadays, there are certain norms for getting promoted, certain norms for getting admitted, certain norms for getting a job, etc. For scientific people, I'm talking about. So you need to have certain number of publications. Each institute or association or agency, they prescribe that you must have certain number of publications in order to be eligible either for a promotion or for joining a particular institute and things like that. And suddenly you find that, say, you are one publication short. So what do? You can easily go to these guys and say that, okay, fine, I'll pay you the money, you get me the publication. And you can get your publication within a time of 2 or 3 days. Okay. So it is that kind of a enterprise where there are absolutely no scientific basis for any of the things they do, and their sole motive is just profit. So these are very highly dangerous journals and publishing houses. They don't have any reputation. You never know where it is, where the money is going, and very often it happens that they take your money and then they may not even say publish your paper. They just go away, and you find that you cannot do anything about it because these entities are not any established entities. They are like shoot and scoot kind of people who leave no trace of their whereabouts again. So, and how do you distinguish such journals? How do you make out whether a particular journal is a predatory journal? It's quite easy actually. I mean, you just needs a little bit of common sense. That's all. You find that these journals, they give very false and misleading information on their websites. Okay, they put up very strange mission statements which are very doubtful, and the contact information is normally uh, fake. The impact factors are also faked. They call them some impact factor. It's not the impact factor which is the international standard. Then they also say that they are memberships of these associations, and when you look at the editorial board members, I mean, you will not be able to recognize anyone in your area. Yeah. So first thing one needs to do is should first check whether they are members of this OASPA or DOAJ, or they belong to this COPE, which I talked about, and whether they appear in the typical citation index or scientific indexes and databases for their areas of research. And then they must also highlight the peer review process very clearly on their website and give proper guidelines for the authors and reviewers. So a lack of transparency in these matters, as well as how that article publication charge is to be paid and things like that, they are red flags for a predatory journal. And another thing you find is that these journals, they are willing to publish anything. Okay, say some behavior of some ant in northeast to behavior, I mean, some superconductivity in Bombay. Okay, so you name it, they said they have it. They will say fine, we will publish. So this kind of a huge range of topics is not the normal thing for a journal. Journals are quite focused in their research areas, and nowadays you find very highly specialized journals for each kind of research area. So the moment you see the journal is accepting a huge range of topics, so you first thing you must suspect it and check whether it is a genuine journal or not. Yeah. And what are the consequences when you happen to publish in these kind of journals, either intentionally or unintentionally? See, whenever you do proper scientific research, the aim of doing scientific research, as I told you in my earlier lectures, is to help the society, gaining knowledge for helping the society. It could be in the fields of technology, it could be fields of health, and many other uh, topics. But basically, the bottom line is that it is for the good of mankind. Yeah. So, but then when research of dubious quality, okay, fraud kind of research, it gets published in these journals. Sometimes, say, for example, in the field of medicine. And if someone looks at these papers unknowingly that they are published in a predatory journal, and then try to follow those results, etc., and do some follow up on that, it can result in very high potential of harming the patients. There was one very interesting case uh, where a person, what he tried to do was he wrote up a bogus research paper on some anti-cancer drug or whatever that he has developed, and he sent it to some 250 or 300 journals. Most of them all is doubtful predatory journals. And the most surprising thing he found was that almost 80% of them accepted that paper. Whereas any uh, even an average scientist in that area of research would have easily been able to make out that that particular paper is a fraud and a bogus paper. Okay. So he got accepted by almost 60% of the 60 to 70% of these journals to which he had sent it. Of course, he sent the paper to the established journals also, where of course they rejected it immediately. Okay. And another very unfortunate fact which turned out from the study was that more than 60% of those papers which were accepted, those journals emanated from India. This was a sad part. So another thing which happens is that the scientific archive that actually gets corrupted. Okay. And because what happens is that unknowingly these papers which have been published in predatory journals, especially if they happen to be bogus, they could get cited in subsequent papers of other good journals also. So this whole thing starts, it's like a worm in a computer going around, and then ultimately the scientific credibility takes a hit. Another thing which can happen is the careers of young researchers, they can get damaged when they publish in these journals, and they get it becomes known to others that they have published in this kind of predatory journals. So you might have done it unintentionally also, but then you have to face the consequence. Then not only the individuals, but the institution profiles also of those individuals, they can also get affected. And as I said earlier, there are several instances when articles did not get published in spite of payment of those charges which they have asked for. So these predatory journals, they result in a huge waste of time, efforts, and money for the scientists and their institutes who publish in such journals. And it would have been better off if they spent the same efforts in publishing in established journals. So why do people do this? Why do people, sometimes in spite of knowing that these predatory journals are there, why do they publish? One main reason is this terrible policy of publish or perish, which I talked to you about earlier. So you need a certain amount, a number of papers, and to achieve that number, you start publishing in these kind of journals. Then basic incompetence, you're you cannot do a proper research work at all, and you don't have the required skills to do a proper research. So when you're such a person, somehow you get a job as a scientist, then you won't be able to do good science in any case. So then the only recourse you have is to publish in these kind of journals. And then another reason is unhealthy competition. If your colleague has 100 papers, you want to have 101 papers. You want to be one up all the time. So this is an unhealthy competition which makes people try and publish in all these kind of journals. And finally, as I said, unintentional publishing. You don't even know, you're not aware of what are these, who are these predatory journals, and you just simply send your good results also to such journals, and then end up paying a big price. And how can one stop these predatory publishing? It is not a job of just scientists, individual scientists, to do this. You require organizational support. Not only organizational support, it has to be organizations across nations which will have to do this. Okay. And they have to be very dedicated and sincere efforts across the nations by the scientific organizations to stop this kind of predatory publishing. And it is the responsibility of these organizations to create proper awareness on the practices and tactics of these predatory journals, especially as I said, among young researchers who may not be aware of all this, who don't have the experience to know which could be a predatory journal and which is not. Okay. So this community has to collectively take up cause against these kind of journals and make sure that they keep on getting exposed all the time. At least within our country, the University Grants Commission has started a very big exercise. Of course, there were some teething problems in this issue, but then most of those problems have now been ironed out. And as I said earlier, UGC has established this UGC Care. If you go to this UGC Care website, there is a list of journals which are supposed to be the good journals, and they also given a list of predatory journals, and one can easily try and select the journals which have been prescribed by UGC from their website and try to publish only in those kind of journals. So now we come almost to the end of this whole exercise. So I took you through several topics. I started with philosophy and ethics, intellectual honesty, research integrity. Then I talked about this major scientific misconducts and not so major scientific misconducts. Then I talked about all these redundant publications, selective reporting, salami publications, data misrepresentations, and then in medical field, what are the ethical issues and what are these ethical committees? Then when it comes to publications, what are publication ethics, and then what are conflicts of interest, and how can publication misconduct take place and unethical behavior in this regard. Then authorship issues, which is very important, and finally ended up with this predatory journals and publishers. So that completes almost the entire syllabus of what I've been asked to uh, cover. And these are some references for further reading, and some of them you might have already seen, like Traction Watch, etc. Then there are certain books, and there's another set of lectures on YouTube. This was put up by the Pune University, Ayush Center of Excellence. There was a national workshop on publication ethics and scientific writing conducted under the, I think, funding of UGC. And this was a very nice set of lectures given by some top people on ethics and scientific writing. I encourage all of you to go to this website and look at this National Workshop on Publication Ethics and Scientific Writing. Then Ethics of Science was a very excellent book by Resnick. I talked about it. And UGC has brought out 2-3 volumes. One is Academic Integrity and Research Quality, and then Good Academic Research Practices is freely downloadable from the UGC website. And I also talked about this book by Dr. Praveen Chadda, Ethics in Competitive Research. Do not get scooped, do not get plagiarized. So I advise you to go through all these references, which will be helpful for. And there was an introduction to philosophy by Professor John Sanders, the excellent series of lectures on philosophy, ethics, and science. So I encourage you to go through these lectures also. Okay, so thank you very much, and the session is now open for any questions. So if you have any questions, you're most welcome to ask. If you wish, you can all unmute yourself and ask whatever you can, because this is the last lecture. And if you have anything left to ask, etc., any doubts, you are most welcome.
To ask question. Oscar.
I don't think I saw any questions in the chat box, at least not in this one.
Please ask questions. We are not.
Everything is crystal clear.
Of course, you speak excellent.
Or people are so bored that they don't want to ask any questions. They are allowed to unmute, I suppose.
Yeah.
Okay. Not many actually.
Okay.
Any questions in the YouTube channel? I can't see.
I don't find out. We're also looking into it. Okay then.
Nothing? Okay, fine.
Okay.
All right. So we meet again on Monday, which is the assignment lecture. Okay. Not a lecture, but the assignment. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.